This is Hamilton Cemetery in Indiana. This is the story of a body snatching. In 1875, Joshua Moore died. His body was exhumed shortly after burial and sent to Indianapolis to be sold to a medical school. While en route, the body was discovered. Police were called, and they decided to let the person claim the body. Shortly after its arrival in Indianapolis, the body was claimed. The person was arrested and sent back to Anderson, Indiana, to stand trial. He was given a light sentence. The body was sent to the coroner's office in Indianapolis, where it sat for a week. The coroner decided to sell the body to pay for expenses. Short time later, the body was discovered under a bridge near downtown Indianapolis. It was identified and brought back to Hamilton Cemetery, where it now rests under an unmarked grave.
Finch Cemetery in Portland, Indiana. Disappearing gravestones. Come count them with me.
Okay, so I wanted to only do like one more video on my series with graves, ghouls, and body snatchers, part of the whole All That's Dark in Indiana series that I'm doing, and I went down a whole rabbit hole with this. And I'm gonna try to end this more in a more lighthearted and historical because man, there's other things with this series and other things I want to do this month that I want to get done. So I'm gonna probably do two more, and maybe I'll come back to it because I'm going to do uh, the thing with Circle City Witches. I'm gonna do a video on connecting with a cemetery. Um, so I'm choosing Crown Hill um, for a whole lot of reasons. That's my hometown. And since I can't go there, I'm just gonna have to do it the old-fashioned way with when it comes to Google. Um, sorry. You know, they're not gonna let me have a driver's license, and they're certainly not gonna let me ride a broom. So, anyway, so I went down this whole rabbit hole when it comes to grave desecrations, ghouls, and famous graves in my state. We need to keep in mind that we had been desecrating graves of the indigenous since we colonized the state, um, and digging up the graves as we're building our roads, our buildings, all of this, what have you. Um, taking robbing from the bodies as well as snatching the bodies and doing things with the bones and all of this type of stuff. We've been doing this for hundreds of years. Uh, and that's something that we need to keep in mind. Not only that, when we were putting up cemeteries, we weren't keeping very accurate records. In Evansville, for example, when the town was under construction, they unearthed a pioneer cemetery and found some graves, and you know we also like to exhume graves and not get all the remains and do all that lovely kind of stuff. During an exhumation in 1986 at a baseball field in Indianapolis, when they were installing some fiber optic cables, they found graves in a baseball field where kids played baseball. We had, I'm sorry, um, during, I think it's important to note that there's a difference between body snatching and grave robbing. Grave robbing being when you take things from the grave or from the casket, from the coffin, whatever. But body snatching is a whole different thing. We do want to kind of go into why our state enacted the first Anatomy Act in around 1880. Oh, when medical colleges were corpses, cadavers were in short supply due to the fact that uh, executions weren't happening, um, and all that type of stuff with medical um, things coming into play. We're learning more. They used to take the cadavers of the condemned, the executed, people of low income. There is a story that I'm looking into when it comes to the Pottersfield uh, cemetery, where one of the poor where one of the poor farms was. The abuses and atrocities at these county farms or these poor farms, that's a whole another thing that I plan on doing. Like I told Amethyst Ascension when we talked about starting this. yeah, Mr. Man wants to come here. You want to make an appearance? Come on. I think he's wanting to. Come on. Come on. I think he wants to make an appearance. He wants everybody to see him. So let's just give Mr. Louis, hey, his debut. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay? You're on camera. Are you happy now? Okay? Okay? Yeah. He likes to be seen. So now that Mr. Lilly has done his video debut, are you happy now? Yeah. Okay. Come on. Not on the table, doofus. Up here. There. See? Is that the camera? Is that you? Okay. So, back in the day, as I was saying, medical colleges needed bodies for dissection, and they were in short supply. So the term resurrectionists, ghouls, body snatchers, resurrection men became a thing. In one case, it was reported that these resurrection gangs, because at one point they were forming gangs, and they were making $35 per cadaver that they would dig up or steal before it could be interred. $35 in 1902. That's a lot was a lot of money back then. And I'm going to be going into some of these cases, and because there's so much information, especially as to why we, in our state, started the first Anatomy Act. So the more I go down into this, I'm just really in a whole rabbit hole with this. But, are you okay now? I guess not. You guys just gonna have to, because I'm not gonna stop the video just because he's barking. He's just sitting by me and he's getting attention, so maybe he'll just be a good boy and shut up. No. And there's a lot of cases and a lot of situations that in these videos that I'm going to be coming up with, and I'll probably do links and names so that you can look these things up yourself, because like I said, there's a lot, especially when some of these court cases, because there were two that made one of which made national headlines. So let's go. Okay, so when it comes to an incident in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Dr. Van Buskirk and his assistant, Mr. William Somers, were attempting to take the remains of Mr. Charles Wright, who had been buried. There was an incident where one of the members involved got in trouble for something else, and he had informed the detectives of the incident, and it was stopped. Then we have issues where doctors were coming out of state to go to Indiana cemeteries to procure bodies. There's an incident with that's called the New Albany Affair. But I think I really want to put some emphasis on the whole thing with when these resurrection gangs or resurrection men, not knowing the history of the person or who they were related to, they would go through obituaries or word of mouth. Their only thing was to get freshly or newly dead corpses, not knowing anything about the family. When atrocities against the more prominent and well-to-do families, when things started to happen to them, then all of a sudden people started to care. So there's an incident, and I will go more into the New Albany incident here in a bit. But when it comes to an incident or called Harrison's Horror, so Benjamin Harrison's father, uh, uh, John Scott Harrison, had passed away, and of course John's grandfather was William Henry Harrison. So, and I believe it's John Scott. Um, if I'm wrong, I'll take the correction. Um, but I've kind of got all my stuff in disarray. But when they went to have the burial and the funeral in Ohio, while Mr. Benjamin Harrison was still a working politician here in Indianapolis, they had noticed that the grave of one of their distant relatives, of Mr. Devlin, had been disturbed. So they buried Benjamin's father, and Benjamin came back to Indianapolis because he was doing all of his political work. And as they were trying to find what happened to the remains of Mr. Devlin, it was quickly discovered that his father's remains had disappeared. So Mr. Harrison implemented, basically, he pulled his strings and got the Pinkertons involved. And I believe it was in Ohio. I can't remember the name of the town. Because I didn't write that one down. Um, and it was something North Ohio. So they got they located Mr. Harrison's remains in a medical college. They went to identify the body, and at first they couldn't recognize it because one of the first things that they did was shave off Mr. Scott Harrison's beard. But he was found in the attic. Um, and it was pretty gruesome. And they of course got the remains back. And I haven't checked Ohio to see if who went down for this whole thing. Because even though they found Mr. John's remains, they did not find the remains of Mr. Devlin until sometime later, and they actually found his remains in a Michigan medical college, which is why Mr. Benjamin Harrison took it upon himself to start what is known in Indiana as the First Anatomy Act of 1880. Um, and so that there were licenses and fairness when it came to cadavers and where the cadavers would come from, and it all had to be licensed. Because another thing that they would do is they would either wait until the family had left and snatch the body before it was buried, or they would run out a few hours after the body had been buried and basically dig the body up and take the remains. And they, of course, didn't return the remains. And once the dissection and all of that lovely stuff was done at these medical colleges or the doctors, the remains were not discarded in a very respectful way. As I said, there's a whole thing with Richard's riot that I'm going to go into because that's a long story. So they there's just that's why he took it upon himself to create, and I believe not only in Indiana, but there was also a ordinance started in Ohio, since they had family in Ohio, um, to start a similar act in the state of Ohio. And I guess when this happened, this made headlines. So that's all about Mr. Harrison's horror. So now we come to the case of Green Lawn Cemetery. I believe it wasn't far from Lucas Oil. But after decades of flooding with the White River, the city began to feel that there was going to be issues with plague and graves being washed up. So they felt the need to go and contact the relatives, and move Green Lawn up to higher and drier ground so there were no issues. And of course, they had contacted the families. And this was a pioneer cemetery and at least the graves of 300 Civil War soldiers. And as they began to exhume bodies, casket after casket was empty. Some were only had clothing inside because I guess when these resurrection men would come, they would just take the clothing off the body and leave it in the grave because they got rather proficient and they could remove a body from a grave hours after it had been buried. So it was discovered that graves after 1990 were empty, and they estimated that it was hundreds of graves. Um, and of course, the families wanted blood, but because remains were discarded after the were done, so there's no way for those people to find out what actually happened to their relatives. So I do want to point out though too is that at one point I guess Crown Hill Cemetery was paying for security, and they were implementing things within caskets to stop people from being able to access the graves. But there also was the whole thing with people having a fear, and there are cases in Indiana where people had been buried alive, so they would pay people to care for the cemetery and listen to see if anyone had rung any bells or if someone had gotten buried. They had means of escape, which is where the term dead ringer came from, by the way. So they had to implement other practices in order to stop this from happening. Um, uh, there are just so many stories, and they never, because it had been so long ago, they never really figured out who to blame. And since some of these colleges in Indiana no longer exist, like the Central College of Physicians and Surgeons, which is a whole nother thing, and when it came to these resurrectionists, when they would form these gangs, there would be literal gunfights at cemeteries over bodies. There was an incident with the New Albany affair, as well as a gunfight in Fishers, referring to the uh, the Central College of Physicians and Surgeons. They were taking the whole term turf war to a whole new meaning. I'm sorry, that's morbid, but that's just my sense of humor sometimes. There was an incident, a report from a W.H. Wathen. I could be pronouncing his name wrong. Um, where it was found that, and likely because they were sending these bodies everywhere, um, where they were even digging up people that had passed from asylums and dissecting them. Just a quick note, I did do some work on the Potter's Field. Um, I believe that's in Pike County, um, where there are only, it's either Pike, I can't remember the asylum off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and look it up. But the other thing is that people that were of low income and such weren't even provided with any type of marker or headstones. There's an incident with Potter's Field where there's only 3 headstones, but they believe that there's at least the remains of 7,000 people buried. It was a county poor farm as well as an asylum. So they were going and procuring bodies from asylums as well as county homes. And because these doctors were going from state to state. Like I said, with the New Albany affair, that involved doctors from Kentucky coming here, and there's a whole thing on that. So I'm going to end this video here so that I can get my paperwork organized, because the New Albany incident, as well as the incident with the Central College of Physicians, that's going to take, that's a lot of information, and I need to get my papers organized so that I can tell this effectively. Some of these things I didn't write down, and I should have when I was doing research on this. Um, peace, love, and light, guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And the next video will be up shortly. I'm hoping to have maybe 2 more of these and then move on to something else, because there's a lot of stuff. This is just a whole rabbit hole. And I'm part of the other reason why I'm doing this is because with the book banning and people wanting to hide history, and as part of our ancestral work, we need to understand our land, as Jasmine Ambrosia put it, and understand the things that happened before we came here. In the literal sense. So, again, guys, please like, comment, and subscribe, and the next video should be up shortly.